as I was mentioning before, the theme for today's Dhamma talk is a very important theme. It's central, isn't it, to the teachings of the Buddha? And this is about craving, or tanha. Often we call it now wanting, desire, expectation, all these different names that we have. And I've subtitled it the slave master or the slave driver. And it is driving all of us. If we're not enlightened, it is driving us. And I'll go into that in more detail in a little while, because this craving is central to the Buddha's teaching, and a person that has destroyed craving, finished with craving, is, of course, a fully enlightened person. And they will not take rebirth because of that. But I was just going to ask you, in what teaching does the Lord Buddha explain or talk about wanting or craving, tanhaya? Can't hear. And of course, I think all of you know, I mean, it's very, 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 very popular because you had Asalapoya not so long ago in July. And of course, it's a Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma, which I've been focusing on in some depth in the last few months for the Vaskale, and also since then. So I will focus on this second noble truth, the origin of suffering, origin of unsatisfactoriness, you could call it imperfection as well. And I remember, I don't think, when I gave the last talk, I don't think I included this story, but it's a nice story because I remember when I was living in near Kalalgoda, living in a cave, a Purana Galena, so that's a very old rock overhang where monks had practiced for a very long time, probably well over 1,000 years. I remember living in that cave for 8 years. It was a great delight to live there because it's a beautiful place on the side of a mountain. It's just where the mountain range goes down to the plain, and Uduwelaway National Park is not far away. You can see it actually from there. And I remember in my early days of being there, one night at about midnight, I woke up and I thought, what is this? I could hear this drumming. And I thought, what's this? And of course, it was the all-night Purut. It was the all-night Purut going on. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is that? And there was a sort of sense of irritation and, wow, you know, all this. And then I recognized what they were chanting. And I think many of you will probably know that when they use the drums, they're announcing the Four Noble Truths. It's the Satya Vibhanga Sutra. And it was at midnight. It was so interesting for me to see how the mind, when I recognized what it was, it flipped from this irritation of being woken up in the middle of the night by something I didn't know what was going on, to delight, because I realized, oh, this is a teaching of the Lord Buddha and the Four Noble Truths. And it just really, I was really amazed at the change in my perceptions so quickly when I recognized what I was hearing actually. Because being on the mountain side in this Purana Galena, of course, the sound rises. And nearly every week there was an all-night period at one or other of the houses, sometimes near the cave, sometimes further away. And of course, the sound rises, and I could hear it very clearly, actually, sometimes it was very clearly. So it was interesting for me. But of course, you know, we know, all of us know as Buddhists that the Lord Buddha mentions that the second noble truth, this is the origin of suffering. And it is this, the samudaya, it is this craving. And he describes it this way in English translation. This is from Ajahn Nissarano or Bhante Sujato from Sutta Central. Now, this is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It's the craving that leads to future rebirth. mixed up with relishing and greed, taking pleasure in various different realms. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving to continue to exist, and craving to end existence. So this is central, isn't it, to our developing the path. This is what we're aiming to understand, what we're aiming to let go of, is this craving that gives rise to rebirth. It's the Buddha mentions it's the origin of suffering, and it's of course we have many words for it, and I've mentioned that wanting is quite a good word in English because it really is something we can relate to more easily. Craving is a bit more of an old-fashioned word, and very interestingly for me, I see so many, I've seen a number of places advertising using the word craving. There's a restaurant called Cravings. And one of the fast foods has now got what they call crave-ons. So in other words, you eat one and presumably you want to eat more, which is the idea of craving. And this craving, of course, this origin of suffering is really, Lord Buddha is focusing on that craving that leads to rebirth. But all craving will lead to suffering. It will immediately project us into the future. It will mean that we've abandoned the present moment or this future possibility of what we think will be happiness or pleasure. And the Buddha's advice to us is that we need, as practitioners, isn't it, to abandon this craving. Craving is to be abandoned. And you see that in the teaching of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where the Lord Buddha mentions this is the origin of suffering, this is to be abandoned, and this has been abandoned by himself. So it is our job, quite a job really, to abandon craving. And this is something that is so important to the practice, because craving is such a part of our lives. This wanting is such a part of our lives. We often don't recognize it. We don't realize how much our lives are spent in desiring, craving, wanting this, or wanting to get rid of that. So it's such an integral part of our experience as human beings, and something that's almost invisible to us. And it's the genius of a Buddha that points out, this is the villain of the piece. This is what gets us reborn. Because, we are reborn. Why are we reborn? Because we want to be. And this is, of course, due to our attachments. There's so many things we attach to. And the Lord Buddha talks about the attachments that lead to rebirth, particularly, but there are others that probably we can focus on as well. But the first one, of course, is karma tanha. And this is the wanting, the desire for those things of the five senses. And really, for all of us, and especially non-meditators, this is the whole world. It's sad, isn't it, really, when you think about it? This is the whole world for most people. These five senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, they lure us out into the world to seek pleasure outside of ourselves. And so this karma tanha, this wanting sensual pleasures, wanting to experience the world of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, is very, very much where most people are living the world. And it's where, but it is, of course, something that is for a spiritual seeker. It's something that actually is a hindrance to us developing the inner path, the Noble Eightfold Path within us. So the sense pleasures, of course, they do. I like to distinguish between happiness and pleasure, just to say, pleasure is what we get from the senses. And there's no denying that they are pleasant. You know, we can see pleasant things, pleasant videos, seeing family, seeing partners, seeing friends, seeing beautiful sights of, you know, landscapes and all sorts of sights. And of course, there's beautiful music and so on. All these things are there. And we often seek our happiness out there, little realizing that, of course, I say this quite often to people, we are the ones giving the happiness to these things. We are the ones giving the significance to these things. But everybody will enjoy seeing that movie, that video, that listening to that music, eating that food, our favorite food. And so it's really, these sense pleasures are very much where most people are hanging out in the world, where most people are seeking some sort of happiness, that it's really just seeking sensual pleasure. And it's also, we're very well aware, most of us are, that if any of these experiences through the senses last too long, they become tortures, absolute tortures. Can you imagine listening to your favorite music for 24 hours? How awful. After that, it would not be your favorite music. So we see these sense pleasures for what they are. They're incredibly short-lived. They have to be. Otherwise, the enjoyment turns into the opposite, doesn't it? As I say, it becomes a torture. And so this is something that is the nature of this kama tanha, you know, this wanting happiness, wanting pleasure from the senses. And many people get caught up in it, thinking this is the only source of happiness. But when we look for pleasure or happiness in the senses, of course, what are we doing? We are, as it were, abandoning, letting go of the happiness, the happiness from within. We're not looking in the right direction, are we? Because when we look outside of ourselves always for this satisfaction, for this fulfillment, this happiness, we are not looking where it's coming from. And of course, it's coming from within. Hello, I can see someone there. Coming from within us. We're the ones that are actually giving happiness to these things, giving significance to them. As I mentioned, not everybody will think of that food, that sight, that sound, that music, whatever it be, as being pleasant, as being a pleasurable thing, as being happiness. So this is very much, and it's why the Buddha very much emphasizes, you all know this word, nekama. You've heard this word, I'm sure most of you have heard this word. Nekama means renunciation. And really what it is renouncing the pleasure from the five senses for the pleasure of the mind, the pleasure of going within, the pleasure of going to the source of happiness, the source of within ourselves. And this is our home. This is really our real home. But most people are living out there in the world, aren't they? And finding, if they can experience as much pleasure as they like from the five senses, we find that those people often get bored with it. It's not, is that all there is? And of course, that's the tendency with seeking happiness, seeking pleasure in the five senses, in the world outside ourselves. So in meditation, we are really looking in the opposite direction, aren't we? We're looking within, and this is really valuable, because this is where the world is really coming from our minds and from our hearts. And you see that, it's so easy to see, actually, you know, somebody that is very depressed. How does the world look? It looks hopeless. It looks grey. It looks pointless. It looks meaningless. And somebody that is very happy, is has got an inner life and inner joy, the world will look completely different. And you see this, you can see this very often within your family, with your friends. I mean, I meet people and I sometimes I think, my goodness, what world are they hanging out in? When they're so negative. I'm sure we've all met people like that, haven't we? They're so negative within themselves. So their experience of the world is just going to be like that. It's going to be a world of this sort of fear and darkness, or maybe anger, or depression, these things. So we are making the world through our inner world. And this inner world is in our minds and in our hearts. And this is why practicing Dhamma is so important, because we are developing, letting go of negative aspects of the mind, of the heart, and developing these really positive ones. Developing not only the positive qualities, the biggest positive quality really is wisdom, isn't it? Understanding the way things are. And that is the biggest happiness, in a sense, for us. So we, of course, with the five senses, we're very much focused on our experience of the body and these five senses. So this is a very important area for us as meditators too, because we realize that a lot of the disturbances in our meditation come from our dependence on these five senses, our interest in these five senses. So when we sit down, what comes to mind? Sometimes cricket scores, sometimes, politics, all these things. These are all the stuff of the five senses. Often what we think of are the people we're close to, and the people that we work with, the people that we like. And if people have upset us, that comes to our mind. And so we see these five hindrances, pancha nivarana, their food, their nourishment is our experience of the five senses. And as we carry it into our meditation, and this is what we are letting go of. We're getting practice in letting go of abandoning these five senses in meditation and going to the happiness of the sixth sense, the mind. And this is where we can develop that deep stillness, that deep peace, and that deep understanding, which can change everything, which can let go of craving. So, and the second type of craving, I think you all know, is bhava tanha, isn't it? And bhava tanha is, of course, the craving or wanting to continue to exist. And this is very much all about our sense of self. And for an enlightened person, we feel this sense of self is a very real experience for us until we've seen through a sense of self, this world of I, me, and myself. And it's such a big part of bhava tanha, of being somebody. This is, isn't it? We all want to be somebody. We want to make our mark in life. And this is something that is very important for us. And we see, when the Buddha mentions the 8 worldly conditions, the loka dhammas, he mentions things like, gain. We want to gain a lot of experience. People these days are very focused on experience, and they have these called bucket lists in the West of things that they want to do, and it's something that affirms themselves. They want to become somebody that is well known, is appreciated, is loved. They want to get praise, of course, and of course pleasure. This is the fourth of the loka dhammas. So this bhava tanha, this desire to continue to exist, is driven, absolutely, isn't it, by attachment. We are so attached to this, especially this five sense world, especially to our family, our partners, our friends, our possessions, we're very attached to all the sights that we like, the sounds, the music, the foods. And these are the things that will bring us back. We want to continue to exist so we can experience again. And of course, if we have good karma, we've got supporting good karma through our actions of body, speech, and mind. When the body passes away, it's possible, very possible, that a person will be drawn by their attachments back to a similar situation to they lived in before, how they lived before. And often, don't we see people, new babies in the family, or friends with new children, new babies, and people will often say, well, isn't he like uncle or like grandfather, or she like auntie or mother, or all the so these. If we get the opportunity, we will indeed try to come back to those things that were people and things that were very, very dear to us. It's like a magnet. So rebirth is really driven by this craving, this wanting, to continue to exist, to re-experience all that we found we were attached to, that we found to be a source of pleasure or happiness. And in meditation too, you see this. We can have this sense of wanting to become, a great meditator, or make a name for ourselves as a Dhamma teacher, perhaps, or a jhana practitioner, these very deep meditations, the dhyanas, as we say in Sri Lanka. So this bhava tanha is something very, very deep. It is the hard thing, the kama tanha, of course, that's what gets us attached and we want to come back to. But this bhava tanha is very, very deep, this wish to just continue as much as possible, continue after this life, and to make something of ourselves. And there's a story I like that I think is quite humorous, but it's a good, I might have told it last time, I'm not sure, but an English monk who lives in Thailand, Ajahn Nissarano, he said when he was in America many years ago, he overheard a woman say, "You may be poor, but you can still become someone." And that's that's the American dream, isn't it? You go from nothing to becoming someone. For most people in America would be wealth, isn't it? Being very rich, being very famous, or being very powerful, perhaps. So this bhava tanha is a really very strong factor that keeps us getting reborn. And it's the factor that we often experience when, our lives are threatened. If you're in a car accident, or something is potentially about to cause the death of the body, then we find how much the survival instinct just comes up. Without thinking, we do something to avoid the body being killed, the body dying. And so this survival instinct is it really shows us how deep this bhava tanha, this craving, wanting to continue to exist is, and how without thinking we will do whatever's necessary to survive. So it's a very deep taproot of our existence, which brings us back to rebirth again and again. And the last one, I think everybody knows, is vibhava tanha. And this one is a very interesting one, because it's because you think it's the desire to get rid of something, but it's really, as I mentioned in the quotation, desire to end existence. And I'd like to say to people today, isn't that what Buddhists want to do? And of course, I'd say yes and no. This vibhava tanha isn't what Buddhists do, for sure. This wish to annihilate the body, thinking that when the body is finished, when it's annihilated, everything will finish, my experience of the world, all those things. It'll just be the end of everything. That is what most people who commit suicide feel like, isn't it? They think like, I want to be out of here. It's so awful, you know. And what's so awful usually is the mind states. Probably the outer situation may not be that awful. And that wish to just annihilate. And of course, this wanting and craving, where is it coming from? It's coming from an incredibly strong sense of self, isn't it? Because usually that's what you want to annihilate. I want to kill myself. I want to be out of here. And it's coming from this willpower that wants to destroy. It's just a very destructive, aversive wish or desire or craving. And it's coming from such a negative state of mind, which is so strong. And as I mentioned, you know, this is really what people, when they commit suicide, the state of mind they have. And some of the people, the practitioners at the time of the Buddha, they were practicing in this way. They wanted to destroy it. They could see, yep, the problem with life is it's always going to be difficult. And the solution is to end rebirth, which is very similar to the Buddha, but the way of doing it completely will not lead to the end of rebirth. And how shocking it must be for people who have committed suicide to have killed the body, have destroyed the body, and then to be amazed that they're still aware, that the mind is still aware. It must be, I don't know whether they would find that, I think actually, if I was in that situation, I would think, oh my goodness, what have I done? There's no point to doing that because it doesn't end everything. And so the suffering that that person is experiencing will continue. And said, of course, and this will, and when they, this will lead to a rebirth. But of course, there in the Buddhist context, well, what's the difference for a Buddhist? For the Buddha, what we are doing is actually allowing the conditions that lead to continued rebirth to cease through wisdom, through understanding the nature of reality, through understanding, when we say the nature of reality, impermanence, anicca, or in Sanskrit, anitya, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, wanting, and of course, non-self, that really this is all a process, the body and the mind. By understanding that, not through willpower, by wisdom power, then the process can cease. But that's quite a lot of wisdom power. So, but of course it does, you know, when you hear about tanha, and people often point this out, they say, well, don't you need some sort of desire to practice a spiritual path? Don't you need the desire to develop the Noble Eightfold Path? Isn't this a form of craving? And of course, it is true. It's like a dilemma, isn't it, really? We talk about craving being the source, the origin of suffering, of the problem of existence. But at the same time, we talk about we need some desire. And of course, in the Buddha's teaching, he often mentions chanda, which can have a negative sense, very similar to craving, actually, but it can have the sense too, more like aspiration. And this can be the aspiration pointing the mind in the right direction. It can be the aspiration to liberate the mind. And so it's a wholesome or a positive motivation. And I like, sometimes we use phrases like, don't we? It sounds funny too. Desire to end desire, or the desire that leads to the end of suffering. So this is, there is a positive desires, and we would call them this sort of desire, this chanda, this aspiration. This is the sort of desire that gets us practicing, but it is practicing with the view of not continuing existence. It's the practice that leads within, focusing within, not towards the world of the five senses, the kama tanha. And it's a practice that understands that, yes, the deep problem, the deep problem with existence is being born. This is what the Buddha discovered, and it's something that is so important in Buddhism. Most Buddhist practitioners, of course, not aiming for that depth, and this is not a personal thing. And that sometimes people, when they hear like this sort of teaching, they think, "Oh, not for me, thank you." No, I'm not ready for it. And of course, we only are ready when the mind understands these things, and it's the mind that is being liberated. So no worries about being ready for it. It's when the wisdom is there. And I'd like to bring up some images of or similes for craving. And last time I think I mentioned this, and I think it's still a very good just to mention it briefly, because I've got another image that I will focus on, is in modern day life. You notice, I've seen it myself, experienced it myself, that this scrolling, when we scroll through things on a screen, on a computer screen, on our telephone, our devices, they call it these days, is really like craving or desire. I see people going through scrolling, through Facebook or whatever. It just keeps going. It's endless, And I notice for myself, it's looking for something, but nothing really satisfies. And I think, wow, this is just wanting, craving. It's a really good image for me of that state of mind, which, really it's just keeping, it's endless to a certain extent. And it's just looking for this satisfaction, which I think, well, maybe the next thing's better, the next profile or the next whatever we're looking at, next video in YouTube, whatever it is. And it's a very good way to destroy our contentment of being in the present moment, because we're just scrolling, we're living for the future. Craving is all about what we'll get in the future. It's the promise, isn't it, that in the future there's happiness, there's fulfillment, there's satisfaction. But of course, if you look, and I think this is where many meditators realize that craving is actually the first noble truth as well. It's dukkha. It agitates the mind and makes the mind restless. This endless scrolling, we just find the mind is just restless, can't settle on anything, and has all this energy of restlessness in it. So scrolling is a very good example. And the other ones that you hear, and I think they're good too, is like craving is like drinking salty water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. And that is one of the translations actually of tanha. One of the more literal translations is thirst. And it's a thirst that can never be satisfied. It's a thirst that takes us out of the present moment into the future. And we are, as it were, abandoning the present for the future, potential happiness. It's not sure, is it? And one of the stories I like very much, and this is a central image for me of craving, and I think it sticks in people's minds when they hear a simile or something that they can relate to. Craving is like an itch. Craving is like an itch. The more we scratch, the more we itch. And sometimes you find that, don't you? Some of the itches that we get, not all itches, but some itches, you just scratch and you just think, stop. It's just going to make this far, far worse. And then, I have my own motto. I say, don't scratch, just rub. So that's I find is a good solution to that itching that we want to scratch, and of course just leads to more itching and more discomfort. And there's a nice story that Ajahn Chah, he often uses. It's from the Buddha, and it's a very nice story of the mangy jackal, those wild dogs. It's a sort of simile. And it really deals with Ajahn Chah when he was a younger monk. He was really discontent when he stayed in monasteries. He saw all the monks and novices, and he thought, oh, they're not practicing well. They're not practicing like I am. They're really sloppy, And so he was really critical when he was in these monasteries. But then he discovered, this is even more interesting, when he stayed on his own, he was really discontent still, but usually with himself and the situation he was in, that, oh, there's too much noise from the village, there's too much, there's not enough of this or whatever. But eventually, because he was a deep meditator and had a lot of wisdom, he did a reality check. He thought, well, what's going on? Why is this? I'm discontent when I'm in a monastery. I'm discontent when I'm on my own. And of course, the obvious thing that you'll probably conclude, I do too, is that discontent is within him, within us. And this is the itch. And this simile is really one that really captures that. And he, from contemplating, he saw that it was a need to let go and to accept things as they are, realize the nature of existence. A very big part of nature of existence is this imperfection, this unsatisfactoriness. We'll never get it quite as we want. If it is, we do, it won't last for very long. But when one knows that, it changes it completely. We know where all this discontent is coming from, where the source of the problem is coming from, the way we're seeing the world, our view. So the story, I'll read it out actually, and this is from Ajahn Chah, how he tells it actually. The Buddha once saw a jackal, that's a wild dog, run out of the forest where the jackal was staying. It stood still for a while, then it ran into the underbush, and then out again. Then it ran into a tree hollow, then out again. Then it went into a cave, only to run out again. 1 minute it stood still, the next it ran. Then it lay down, then it jumped up. The jackal had the mange. Do you know what mange is? It's that skin disease that dogs get. We probably get something like it too from time to time. And when it stood still, the mange would eat into its skin. So it would be running. Running, it was still uncomfortable. So it would stop. And standing, it was still uncomfortable. It would lie down. So it would lie down. Then it would jump up again. And running to the underbush and the tree hollow, never staying still. The Buddha said, monks, did you see that jackal this afternoon? Standing it suffered, running it suffered, sitting it suffered, lying down it suffered. It suffered. It blamed standing for its discomfort. It blamed sitting for sitting. It blamed running and lying down. It blamed the tree, the underbush, the cave. In fact, the problem was with none of those things. The problem was with his mange. And then Ajahn Chah explains, we are just the same. And it's true, as the jackal. Our discontent is, and that itch is due to wrong view, because we don't exercise sense restraint, he says. We blame our suffering on externals. Usually we blame it on others, or we can blame it on the situations we find we live in. Whether we live in Thailand, he says, America or England. You could add here Sri Lanka too. We aren't satisfied. Why not? Because we still have wrong view. Just that. So wherever we go, we aren't content. But just as that jackal would be content wherever it went, as soon as the mange was cured, so would we be content wherever we went, once we rid ourselves of wrong view. And of course, I think most of you would pick up straight away, and I've more or less mentioned it, that the mange, what does it stand for? And it's this craving, this desire, this wanting, this expecting, this discontent. Discontent is quite a good word for it, because we can't quite find will give us satisfaction, and it leads to this restlessness, always searching, always wanting, thinking that something else will give us this contentment, this happiness that we're seeking. And also he mentions at the end, doesn't he? He mentions there that it's once we're rid of our wrong view. And of course that brings up, well, what wrong view do you think he was talking about, Ajahn Chah? And yes, most of you have probably guessed, the Four Noble Truths. And particularly the first noble truth, isn't it, of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and the second noble truth of craving or wanting. But each is very much craving or wanting, not understanding that our minds are the source of the problem, this wrong view in our minds. And when he says wrong view, it's the wrong view in the sense that we're not understanding the nature of existence. Because when we don't understand that the nature of existence, it will always be this way. This is what the Lord Buddha said. It will always be impermanent, changeable. It will always, and that will contribute to this sense of unsatisfactoriness, to dukkha, because everything that we want will change. That will change. The objects or the people that we want in our lives will change. And we change too. The things that we thought were so important some time ago no longer are important. They seem pointless. And of course, the third aspect of reality is that this is a process of non-self, a process of conditioning that gives rise to this body and mind. So this attitude, this not realizing the nature of reality, is the source of this discontent, this craving, this wanting. And this is what Ajahn Chah is pointing to. And of course, in that simile that I read out, he also mentions we blame, like the jackal blamed the cave, he blamed the underbush, blamed standing, sitting, lying down, all that. And like that, we too blame the things out in the world, little realizing, as Ayakema said, these things in the world are triggers, only triggers for the emotions within us, the good qualities, the bad qualities within us. That's what they trigger. And this is where they trigger this craving, often very basically, isn't it? Craving to get, we want, or we want to get rid of. This is the two aspects of craving. And so when we realize where the mange really is, inside us, then we've got a spiritual practice. When we think the mange is out there in the world, we haven't got a spiritual practice. We're looking in the wrong place. We can never finish this itch, never come to a peace, because this itch will just continue. This discontent will continue wherever we go. So I just wanted to, we need time to finish, to the big question, of course, with craving and with wanting, the second noble truth is, how do we abandon it? How do we let go of craving? Because this is what the Lord Buddha mentions, doesn't he? That this craving is to be let go of. And he mentions, as I said before, his realization is, this is the origin of suffering. This should be abandoned. this has been abandoned. We haven't abandoned it. So this is where we work. And when we actually understand craving, when we really understand craving, it will bring a lot of ease to our lives, because we realize that this craving is not our best friend. It is not something that actually really leads to happiness. Most people in the world think that, don't they? It's really, they think this craving is their best friend, and you know, if I didn't crave, I wouldn't get what I want, and then I wouldn't be happy. And they live their lives in the future, abandoning the happiness, the contentment, the present moment. But so this is something that I'll focus on now, just briefly before we end. But it should be said too, is this abandoning permanent that the Lord Buddha is talking about? And of course, in terms of the second noble truth, it isn't permanent. It is something we do, something that comes up, a wisdom that comes up that allows us to let go of craving when we need to. It's only when we get to the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, that we completely end craving, finish with it for good, see it to the depth, see the three characteristics of existence to their depth. And then we can let go of craving. Until that time, we think we own craving. We are the craving. We are the ones choosing, wanting. That's what we feel, isn't it? And of course, the Lord Buddha is pointing to the fact that this isn't the case, actually. This craving, this wanting, this choice that we feel we are making is actually very conditioned by so many things, advertising, by people in our lives, many things, sources that influence craving, that bring it up, that are part of the process. So it is, and it's in the third noble truth, we have the gradual cessation of craving. And that's a very important word, cessation, because cessation is a natural fading away of this craving from understanding it. And it's a permanent condition, because the third noble truth is really seeing nibbana too, isn't it? And so this is really coming from understanding deeply the nature of reality, deeply that we're not the owners of craving. We aren't craving. And also seeing the impermanence of all this and seeing the non-self of it. So in terms of the second noble truth, how do we abandon or craving, desire, wanting? This is really important for us, actually. And of course, it always comes back to the core teachings of the Buddha, the Noble Eightfold Path particularly. And this is really essential, is the four right efforts, samma vayama. And this is how we can avoid or let go of negative states. And this craving really gives rise to a lot of negative states of mind, a lot of desire. When we have cravings, often competition comes up with other people, and many other negative emotions fear comes up because we think, well, what if I don't get it? And so on. So it's avoiding and letting go of these negative states, but it's also developing and maintaining positive states. Because you see that when we develop positive states, actually, we can avoid negative states of mind coming up. So for instance, when we develop thankfulness, we're really grateful, and craving doesn't have a chance. When we're really content, this is called santuti in the Pali language, craving doesn't have a chance because we're happy just with the present moment. We're really feeling of satisfaction, being present and happy here and now. So these are the four right efforts are a very good way of overcoming, checking up on the mind, where it's coming from. And as I say, avoiding those negative ones. The hard one is letting go of negative ones once the negative mind states, once they've arisen, and developing positive ones and maintaining. These four right efforts are really crucial to letting go of craving. And of course, one of the big differences, and this is why it's the wisdom in the Buddha's teaching, is knowing the difference between the positive and the negative. Amazing, isn't it? So many of us are not really, we think, oh, it's a really simple knowing what's wholesome, what's unwholesome, but it's not the case actually. And when craving or desire steps into the picture, we can really do negative things, thinking, well, it's worthwhile, I want to get this, we can do and say negative things. And so it's not a simple thing, but it is actually a deep wisdom to know the difference between what is wholesome, unwholesome, kusala, akusala, and what's positive and negative. But of course, as practitioners, sati sampajanya, this sort of awareness, full awareness, sometimes called situational awareness, we know what's going on. And this is very important. Know what's going on outside and inside our minds. And then we can see what's coming. Then it's possible to avoid negative states of mind. You can see where the mind is heading. And of course, for the Buddha, the Lord Buddha is always teaching us, until we're stream enterers, we have to have restraint in terms of the five senses and also the sixth sense, the mind, which can give us actually much more suffering than even the five senses, because it's wrong if it's wrongly directed. But of course, what really allows us to let go of craving is wisdom, isn't it? Wisdom, investigating, vimamsa, and contemplation. And this is, what do we contemplate? Our experience. When we're experiencing dukkha in life or in meditation, we need to ask ourselves, what do I want? Because that's basically the cause for all of our discontent, for all of our feeling of unsatisfactoriness, is this wanting. What do I want? And that can be very, very illuminating, or you can really get insight when you see what you want. And so this is something, as when we find we've got a lot of dukkha in our lives or in our meditation, just to ask that question, what do I want? And just to see where it's coming from, and to just for a moment, when we experience that situation, just to let go of that wanting and see what happens. And usually you find it's quite peaceful, and things are very are okay, and the dukkha is gone. But that's just for the moment. So you can see this wanting for what it is, but it's through really understanding the nature of dukkha and craving, wanting, that we are able to let go of it. As I mentioned, when we really understand, no, this is not my best friend. It's a con man. It's somebody who's trying to sell me something that I fall for all the time, because I think it's me who's wanting and craving, little realizing, as I say, it's a very conditioned phenomena. And that when we are scratching the itch of craving, wanting, we're just slaves to craving, wanting. The Lord Buddha uses the word tanha dasa, slaves of craving. And then essence, I mean, it's really, I think, such a wonderful phrase, actually. It's, this slave driver, this slave master that's pushing us all the time. And we don't realize it. We don't realize that it's destroying our happiness, and it's really running our lives. Every moment of our lives, I've seen this in a meditation, actually, like, dislike, want, don't want, it's really running. So tanha is not a very theoretical thing. It's something we can experience in daily life very easily. But as I say, when we think it is us, our choice, our craving, our wanting, that's the big problem. It's very hard to let go of until we realize, hang on, this craving is really coming from a lot of causes and conditions that are nothing to do with a self, somebody, some idea of an I or me in here that's permanently choosing and wanting, not wanting. It's not that at all. It's not a person who's wanting. It's a process And I've been influenced by so many things, usually our friends and the society we live in and the time we live in. That often, I often say to people, advertisers, companies, organizations would not bother spending huge amounts of money on advertising if it didn't work. And it does work. We find, even though we say, well, I'm the one who chooses, we find ourselves going out and buying things that we've seen advertisement for. Because once there is contact, there's a perception, then there's feeling. Perception is, oh, this looks good. And a feeling, oh, that's a pleasant feeling. And then we want it. And then we latch onto it. Oh, I've got to have that, really. New phone, new car, new home, or a new relationship, whatever it is. And so we're not the ones choosing. It's really this conditioning that's doing it. So I'd like to finish there. Maybe just to, there's a nice, I think I'll read this one too, just to finish with another quote from Ajahn Chah that I really like about this sort of craving, about attachment, and how to deal with it. It's a very wise and also really attachment to views as well. So it's a very wise teaching, and he says it's from a teaching he gave on right restraint. And this is Sangvega. And he says Buddhist teaching says not to have grasping attachment, not to hold things, hold tightly to things. We don't understand this fully. The point is to hold, but not tightly. That's good, isn't it? For example, I see this object in front of me. I'm curious to know what it is. So I pick it up and look at it. It's a flashlight torch. Now I put it down. That's holding, but not tightly. If we're told not to hold anything at all, what can we do? We will think we shouldn't practice sitting or walking meditation. So at first, we have to hold without tight attachment. You can say this is tanha, what I've been talking about, craving, wanting, but it will become a parami, so like a blessing. It will become a very positive karma. For instance, you came here to Wat Pa Pong, was his monastery. Before you did that, you had to have the desire to come. With no desire, you wouldn't have come. We can say you came with desire. It's like holding, isn't it? Then you will return. That's like not grasping. Just like having some uncertainty about what this object is, then picking it up, seeing it's a flashlight or a torch, and putting it down. This is holding but not grasping. Or to speak more simply, knowing and letting go. That's good, isn't it? Picking up to look, knowing, and then letting go. Knowing and putting down. Things may be said to be good or bad, but you merely know them and let them go. You are aware of all good and bad phenomena, and you are letting go of them. You don't grasp them with ignorance. You grasp them with wisdom and put them down. So with our practice, this is the important thing, is to really understand this craving, to really understand wanting, desire, this craving, to see that it's such a central part of our experience and to understand it with deep wisdom, which comes from a still, peaceful mind that's clear of the 5 hindrances and can see it very, very clearly, very penetratively, very directly. And when we see it very directly, then this insight, this can lead us to the end of craving. It will certainly allow us to abandon craving temporarily, but it can lead to the cessation, the permanent letting go of craving, wanting, tanha. And so this is what we're aiming at. And of course, when we experience deep meditation, we've let go of a lot of dukkha. the dhyanas and so on are very blissful states of experience. But then we come out of those, and then we experience this, the nature of reality, which is this dukkha, this unsatisfactoriness. But if we know it, it makes a huge difference, because we don't blame ourselves. Often we think we're not smart enough, not good looking enough, or whatever. That's why we've got this dukkha, and we have these cravings coming up in order to address it. So I'd like to encourage you to, to really understand that this tanha, this craving, this wanting, in meditation, to see it in our minds when we sit down to meditate, when there's we're uncomfortable, to know that when we move, it's dukkha, that's this craving and dukkha that's pushing us to move, to scratch, to whatever we do in meditation. And it's what's driving us in our lives. So I'd like to finish there. It's a bit late and it's time for lunch for you. So I better let you go. So sadhu for that. And may you continue practicing and using this meditation day for developing that inner world, that spiritual world, that the world where everything outside is coming from, really. There is a real world out there, but the way we experience it's coming from inside here. So may it be a peaceful inner world. May it be a beautiful inner world, and the outer world will be like that. So I will join you later for a guided meditation, and may you continue your practice, have your lunch, and continue with mindfulness. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.